Land. And today I'm very delighted to share with you that we have with us Dr. Sandeep Krishnamurthy, Dean at University of Washington, School of Business Kirkland, Washington, USA, as the expert on board. I also extend a very warm welcome to our enthusiastic participants who have joined us on this knowledge sharing forum. I would briefly introduce Dr. Sandeep Krishnamurthy. He is the first Dean of the AACSB Accredited School of Business at University of Washington, Bothell. This role involves managing the School of Business as its Chief Academic and Administrative Officer with primary responsibility for faculty, students, curriculum, budgets, and external engagement. He received his PhD from University of Arizona in marketing with a minor in economics in 1996. He received a PGDBM from XLRI and BTech in chemical engineering from IIT Bombay. And while, as I told you, I was reading about Sir's profile, I could gather that he's a passionate and an inspirational teacher, loved and admired by students from all the domains. I once again welcome you, Dr. Sandeep Krishnamurthy, on this forum. And without any further delay, I would request you to please address the participants.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let me first start off by saying that it's just quite a pleasure for me to be here. And I see already there are about 150 people signed up. So that's fantastic. You know, when Parul contacted me, I had no idea that it was such a tremendous event. So I hope that I'm of help to all of you, and especially those of you that are thinking about conducting research or that are thinking about writing a paper, especially targeting journals outside of India, that are international journals that follow international standards. My aim is to give you some very practical advice and also maybe provoke you into thinking along some lines. Uh, I would start off by saying that it's always a pleasure to be in the presence of so many wonderful teachers. So Acharya Devo Bhava, to all of you, thanks for the way you teach your students and your commitment to supporting the student learning. I think that is a fantastic thing that you do. I think even if you touch the life of one student, you're changing the future of the world. So thank you for your work. And I also feel that COVID has made us understand the meaning of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. We are all more connected now, and it is entirely up to us. From our house, we can easily connect to people around the world. So, Director Ma'am, I echo your sentiments of would love to physically be in touch one day. But today we are here, and I'm hopeful that what I'm going to talk about is of use to you. So I will be presenting, and I think Ritu, I think you can be a backup in case my internet, goes down or something like
Sure,
that.
sir.
But hopefully, we will have a seamless presentation together,
Sure,
working
sir. Sure.
together. We'll collaborate. So let me try to present now. Hold on a second. Yeah, it is not letting me. Okay, I think I found it. So the topic I chose to talk about today is called on causality and truth claims. And this may sound pretty abstract. There might be people in the audience with expertise in finance, operations, management, marketing, accounting, and so on. And they might be asking, how does this, impacting me? But I hope that I'm able to convince you that the publication process and the act of publishing in a journal is really about understanding this. And just to give you some of my personal background, and you can look me up on Google Scholar, for example, um, I I have something like 5,000 citations, for my work, and I have been blessed in publishing papers in multiple journals. And so I hope that this is coming across to you as very practical advice. Um, so let's start out, from the very beginning, that in terms of what is the role of truth claims in scientific research. And um, I think fundamentally, the whole peer review process is set to to be a process by which we communicate with each other about what we believe to be true. It is as though we are all observers of the world. We observe one corner of the world and we see something, and we want to tell our peers around the world that, hey, we see something that we believe to be the truth. Okay. And in most cases, in peer reviewed journal articles, the process is set up in such a way that you are paired up with somebody else, and that person, as I say in the slide, is a dispassionate skeptic who wants to read what you say very objectively and then wants to ask the question, how can we be sure what we are reading is the truth? How can we be sure what we are reading is the truth? So the reader of your paper is first the external reviewer, and the external reviewer is reading the work by asking the question, how can we be sure what we are reading is the truth? And sometimes we all get frustrated with the review process. We submit a paper, we think that we have seen something that is very important. We feel like we have seen something that is novel, innovative, unusual, and it deserves attention. But what the reader is saying is, okay, I see that you have followed the scientific method. You have done some hypothesis testing and empirical results are included in the paper. But how can I be sure that what I'm reading is the truth? How can I be sure that, you know, what you are presenting to me is something that is so important that everybody that reads this journal should gain access to this material? These are the sorts of questions that they're asking. So they're asking questions like any skeptic would ask: what is new? Why should we care about this particular piece of information that you're presenting? Why should so many people study this paper and use it in their PhD courses, etc., etc.? So they're asking, why does this paper matter? So it's very important that when you submit to an international journal, you understand that the stance that the reviewer takes is one of a dispassionate skeptic. The person says, look, I want to be as objective as possible, but I want to evaluate what you're saying. Um, and they are, so yeah. So as they try to evaluate your work, they're asking a few questions of themselves. So they're saying, the first one is a lot about it is rationality. So they're trying to understand if what you're presenting makes logical sense. So frequently reviewers are really put off by logical inconsistencies. If you say something, in one part of the paper that contradicts what is there in some other part of the paper, they will immediately catch it. Similarly, if you have a modeling paper and you have made some assumptions, they will be asking, are the assumptions valid? Are the models defensible? Is the paper internally coherent? Does the paper flow by itself? They're asking questions like this. The second is they're asking a question called around generalizability. So they're saying, look, are the findings of the study generalizable? Frequently, when you go through the review process, you realize that um, the reviewers are interested in understanding if what you're observing is so unusual that it is a story unto itself, or is it something much broader that can be generalizable? They're very interested in this idea. So For example, many of us like to write case studies that we can use in our classes. That is great. The the only issue is that is not a generalizable um, that is not generalizable by definition, right? Because we are taking one story from one part of the world in one company, and in that company we're looking at one manager making a decision, and we are presenting that to our students. I think that is fine as a teaching aid, but it doesn't really make a generalizable truth claim, meaning that whatever we describe is context dependent. It is sample dependent. So whatever we're presenting is dependent on that organization. It is dependent on the dependent on the manager that we are looking at, and so on. So there are many other considerations we can go into, but a lot of times people are interested in the question of causality. I will just take a break here because I'm not able to see if I'm still on. I'll just stop sharing for 1 minute.
So it's a
Yeah.
clearly visible and audible, sir.
Yes, sir.
Everything is clearly visible and audible?
Yes, sir.
Right, sir.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Just double checking because everyone was so nice and quiet. So I thought I lost you. So just being very careful. Okay. Three things that a reviewer might typically think about when reading a paper is rationality. Is this a logical set of statements that the authors make? Are the statements generalizable, and is do the authors establish causality? I want to say at the outset that there are two different philosophies of research, and I think one philosophy is what I call positivism, and well, that is what it's called in the literature. And the idea there is that we make sense of the world through causal relationships. We understand that this causes this, and that's how we make sense of the world. We know that if we touch a hot surface, we get burnt. That's cause and effect at work, right? And similarly, we can think of so many other cause-effect relationships. So a positivism believes in generalizability, and I think generalizability is important. At the same time, there are some that may argue along what we call postmodernism is the other extreme of positivism, and they're not interested in generalizability. There they say even if it's context dependent, so what? They say the context might matter more than the phenomenon, or the context is the phenomenon. And while that may be true, that some contexts are very novel, I think that in my view that is not really a broad mainstream view. In general, I think thinking through causality is the way to approach writing the paper, in my view. So, I started out by this very negative slide, which is why papers get rejected, a practical assessment. And this is based on my journey as an author, a special issues editor, and in some cases I've even been a book review editor for the Journal of Marketing, and um, I can tell you that many of these things are very commonly cited in the reviews of papers. So my hope in sharing this with you is not to depress you, but to say that to present your work in a certain way is very important in order for you to publish in an international journal. Otherwise, it will not get published. Okay, so let us look at some of those things. Number one, contribution insufficiency. If people are not clear what is it you're contributing, or they think that what you're contributing is very limited, they are unlikely to engage with your paper. Number two, illogical structure. They're not following the structure of the paper. They might see some sections absent. I have reviewed papers where there are no hypotheses. We don't know what is it that the authors have in their mind. In some cases, literature review is not sufficient. Major papers in the field have been omitted. Major papers in this sub area have simply not been included in the literature review. Why is that the case? It's because maybe the author does not know. So immediately the reader is likely to say, look, this is not that credible. The major papers in our field have not been cited here. And poor readability in writing. Sometimes, and I've seen papers like this, the the journal simply doesn't know what you're saying. They don't understand it. The papers are poorly written, and the text is written in such a way that the readability is very, very low. So in that case, even though you might have done some good work, people are not able to appreciate it. Poor theory development and no relationship between theory and empirical analysis. This is something that I really want to emphasize. A lot of times nowadays we get large free data sets for large data sets for free. They're easily available, they're widely available. You can just go and download a big data set from so many sites, and you can do so many different kinds of analyses. But it's important to understand that simply doing data mining, where we say, look, I have a big data set, and the data set is has so many variables, and I'm going to try out different models, I think is really a recipe for long-term failure in my view. So we like to say data mining is an important subject, but I'm using data mining in that sense here, which is, it is still popular to use data-driven approaches to analysis. Researcher obtains a data set with n variables and tries all kinds of different models and tries to publish the model that works statistically. This will not work because the reviewers will immediately attack the theory part and will say, why is it that you're claiming that all these things, these relationships are causal, when there is nothing like this in the literature? So either this is such a very novel finding that has to be justified by itself theoretically, or you have to find ways to connect it to some literature somehow. So the review becomes very antagonistic, and it's not in your interest. So paying attention to the theory part, I think, is really important. And I don't know if you can see the details of this. Are the words in this visible to everyone? Because some of it is a little small.
So they're
Sir,
visible.
it is very much relevant.
Visible.
Okay. Yeah. So so there is a site that collects spurious correlations, and this is a site between and where there are two variables, and it is one variable is films that Nicolas Cage appeared in any particular year, and the y-axis is swimming pool drownings, and literally he shows that the two are very highly correlated. Now, if I had no understanding of what was going on, I might come up with a result like this, to say that two variables in my data set are correlated, and hence there is a paper here, hence I must write a paper, hence I must try to publish the paper. And when I try to publish the paper, immediately my colleagues and all the reviewers are going to say, of course, this makes no sense. Why is it that a films an actor appears in, why should it affect the number of people who drown in a swimming pool? Has no, meaning whatsoever. So um literally, um, this may be laughable to us. If you show it like this, people will say, oh, this is silly, we would never do this. But really, in effect, many of us are doing things like this. When we try to write a paper, we are trying to create a story where none might exist. So it's just good to be aware of it as an accountability mechanism to ask ourselves, are we truly doing the Nicolas Cage and people drowning kind of work, or are we truly looking at two variables that should really matter, because the theory says so, because there is a whole foundation that has been laid over a long period of time, that supports that. So so just something to be aware of. So the context of the study is deeply important. A lot of times you will see that um, people want you to describe the context of your study, which, for example, it is very important for you to know which discipline you're contributing to. Is this a marketing paper, an operations paper, or a paper that contributes to both operations and marketing? Something good to be very clear about. It is also good to really articulate the empirical context of the paper, meaning, are you studying Indian and Japanese companies? Are you studying small companies, large companies? Just describing the context in which you do the paper is very important. And a lot of times, linking to established theoretical frameworks gives the reviewers confidence that you are actually doing something that is connected to other important work. A great example is a technology adoption model. It is one of the top 3, top 5 frameworks in MIS, and also top 3 frameworks in technology management. So this is the framework that is used in so many different contexts to understand why is it that people adopt technology and why is it that they don't adopt technology. So if you are, demonstrating that your empirical work is connected to the technology adoption model, people immediately know what you're talking about. Mostly, the fundamental justification should be theoretical rather than empirical. Empirical work should measure what is theoretically posited. Empirical work should measure what is theoretically posited. So this is my big advice for you. And it is, I've seen so many people where they first do the analysis and they worry about the theory later. And for them, theory is just a way to get it published. Please, reflect on, your work, and sincerely think about, how you're approaching theory, and think about it, and think of ways in which it can be strengthened. We all can improve, and certainly that's something that I wish we all improve on. So let us kind of get to what we would regard as 3 of the basic conditions. And again, this might be a good time to say this. There might be some people in the audience who are advanced scholars, and for you I say namaskar, adab, hey, thank you for being here. But please, thank you for your patience as we go through some fundamentals. But for those that are also well published, I hope this is helpful for you. So I hope this is not too basic. But sometimes the fundamentals are worth going over again and again. So this is being presented in that light. So the basics of causality, you might say it is so easy, but please, bear with me. So there are 3 conditions, and we'd like to think that each must hold. All of them are necessary but not sufficient. So if I take one of the conditions and I say, is it necessary? Answer is yes. And I say, is that sufficient? Answer is no. So there are 3, and imagine, evaluating your work or any other published work applying these 3 principles. First one is what we call concomitant variation. It's just a fancy way of saying that E, meaning the effect, must increase with increases or decreases with C. Meaning that the cause, if the cause changes, the effect also must change. There must be some variability in the data that is tracking as a result of the variability in the cause. So variability in the effect is tracking variability in the cause. This is concomitant variation. The next one is sometimes called post hoc ergo propter hoc. It's a Latin phrase. Okay, it says you're no longer presenting. Can all of you still see me? Sorry for checking.
Yeah,
No, it's
no, we
it's
cannot.
there,
We
sir.
cannot.
It's there. Okay.
There.
Presentation is there.
No, we
Okay.
cannot see it. Sorry, I cannot see it.
You cannot see. Can I
Uh,
stop?
So you can present again, please.
I'll do it again. I'll stop sharing and I'll try again.
Um, Meantime, I also posted one question. Of course, once you finish, you can address to
Why
it.
don't I take questions at the very end? Because,
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm having difficulty going back and forth. So once we
Mhm.
finish presenting, I'll take a
Yeah,
look
sure.
at that. Okay.
Yeah, sure, sure.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I was just the three conditions. The first one is concomitant variation, which uh, comes close to correlation if you think about it. But I would distinguish between concomitant variation and correlation. Um, and we can get into that a little bit later if you want. Next is post hoc ergo propter hoc, which is cause occurs before effect, or effect occurs after cause. And the third one is alternative explanations must be examined and eliminated. So this is very, very important. So we are going to come to a few explanations soon here, but a lot of times when you present your work, in a paper, the reviewers will push you on what we call robustness checks. So for example, let us say you've done a research that says, um, the happiness of students is driving them to perform well on exams, right? In which case, a reviewer might come back and say, have you tested for the age of the student, the gender of the student, and have you tested for, so many other variables, and the mood of the student, for example, etc., etc. So the idea is they're saying, can we come up with an alternative explanation to satisfy the results that you found, and then can we convincingly and credibly eliminate those explanations? Because if we can do that, then we can be satisfied that what we're observing holds true even after controlling for a whole lot of things. So the reason they're asking you for robustness checks comes from this very simple definition of causality. Concomitant variation, cause occurs before effect, and alternative explanations must be examined and eliminated. And the way you write your hypotheses are very important. And please understand that not all hypotheses imply causality. Very important. So a lot of people think that if they are looking at a test of means between two groups as their empirical test, or test of proportions, one-sided test, two-sided test, those things are sufficient to establish causality. They're not. They just establish significant differences between two groups, which is interesting, but that doesn't mean that we know what is causing that difference, right? We don't know what is causing that difference. So basically, hypotheses that are set up this way, they do not claim any causality, right? So level of construct X is expected to be different between group A and group B, for example. I've seen studies in which this is the way they write. And the immediate reaction is, even if that's the case, why is it that we should pay attention to that? Why is that interesting? Why is that novel? Or why is that, a substantial contribution? So hypotheses like these sorts, they don't really tell us enough about a cause-effect relationship. Hence, they are seen as having limited contribution. And there are some areas where it is very hard to get a sample, or we know so little about that subject that, and people think it's very important. But generally speaking, hypotheses like these are something that I would not recommend. So also important to cite that, to say that just because I'm talking about causality here, it doesn't mean that every single paper must establish causality. As earlier, like as I said, there is a whole line of work which is postmodern. There is qualitative research that I show here at the very bottom. A qualitative research might be, for example, you have a professor studying the media habits of pregnant women in a village. I mean, it is so deeply moving to learn about the stories about these women, and it might be a very interesting ethnography. But I'm not talking about that. And that is something that is contextual, qualitative work. And some people do that, and some people are successful in publishing those. And there are some fields where that is accepted more than others. But I'm not talking about that today. I'm so important to again talk about that. But there are other kinds of papers that don't require causal claims. An example, it is very common for in the business journals to have literature review and future directions. So I myself have published a paper in the Journal of Interactive Marketing where we're looking at, you know, understanding what's an interactive technology and its implications for marketing and retail strategy. So that is something that, has no data in it. And so hence there are no causal claims. We propose some tentative theoretical models, but that's kind of the extent of it. There's some meta-analysis. There's theoretical essays. There can be theoretical development without data. So, but I think it is fair to say that both the literature review, theoretical essay, and meta-analysis are typically written by more established and senior scholars rather than somebody that is just starting out in the field. There's something to be aware of. But I think meta-analysis, for example, has a lot of, interesting, ideas, interesting kind of twists. Okay, so let me just start out with some basic ideas. So what I'm going to first describe to you is how you can simply in your mind visualize um, how you want to present your hypotheses or your theory work, right? And then they will map that out to some simple ways by which you can test it out. And again, my apologies if this is going at a very basic level. Please bear with me. We can always ramp up the difficulty, but let us kind of get past, the main ideas here. So the way we would write a hypothesis with a single cause is that, that variable C is has a positive impact on, variable E. Or we would say that, as the level of C increases, the level of E should also increase. But we can actually, come out and, claim that uh, we are expecting a causal relationship here. So we may want to say that, the higher the level of consumer happiness, the greater their purchasing behavior. That's correlational the way it is set up. But you could also claim that the greater the consumer happiness, or greater consumer happiness causes greater, purchasing behavior. That would be very clear for people to understand. Um, of course, there could be multiple causes. It's not always clear that only one thing causes an effect. So, in this case, you're saying that, this causes, this causes C1 causes E, C2 causes E, C3 causes E as well. There are multiple causes for one phenomenon. There's not just one reason why some phenomenon occurs. And so as a result of that, we are able to say that all three variables will have partial impacts. And this is kind of more realistic, right? And just to show you, this simply maps out to some basic regressions, right? We have, one cause is, effect equals beta 0 plus beta 1 C, and multiple causes. You have beta 1 C1, beta 2 C2, beta 3 C3. Of course, does a significant regression model equate to establishing cause? I would say it comes very close to. But main thing that we would want to pay attention to is multicollinearity. As you know, the way to pay attention to that is to look at the correlation matrices, to look at pairwise correlations, and to see which ones are high. We are trying to eliminate confounds. So if C1 and C2 are very highly correlated, and we are trying to understand if we can trust beta 1 and beta 2. And we know that if C1 and C2 are correlated, beta 1 and beta 2 cannot be trusted. So if they're highly correlated, one of the variables may have to be dropped, and then you run the regression again. The main issue with this idea is multicollinearity. And so this is the first set of causal relationships that we can think about. The second one that I'd like to talk about is called a moderating effect. A moderating effect is like the best way of thinking about it is the volume button on your phone. So so a moderator can strengthen or weaken an effect. So here we have a single cause on an effect, cause C affects E, but we are saying that there's a moderator, and a moderator M is either strengthening or weakening the effect. It could have a positive moderator, which means that as M increases, the relationship between C and E also increase, right? Or it could have a negative impact, where as the moderator increases, the effect between C and E becomes weaker. And the way that we typically test for this is through a simple interaction effect. Here we have three variables we check on: C, M, and the interaction between C and M. I have seen variables with uh, two moderators. I have seen three causes, two moderators. I mean, you can have very complex regression equations that come out of all of this. But certainly, I think this is also a very simple theoretical way of understanding causal relationships, which is that C causes E, but we're also saying that it is moderated by a variable M. As M increases, if there's a positive impact, the relationship between C and E becomes stronger. If M has a negative moderating impact, as M increases, the relationship between C and E becomes weaker. Okay, I hope that is clear. We also distinguish that with a mediating effect. Okay, so the idea between mediating effect, and here I'm going to show two different models, and there are many much more complex ways of estimating all of this, and you can put it in a structural equation model, and you can really estimate all the variables together. You can estimate all the equations together. You can do a partial least squares. All kinds of things can be done. But here, I've set up a simple, mediating impact, and here you have two regressions, where basically you have one regression where M is causing E, and the other regression where C is causing M, right? So the first M equals beta 2 plus beta 3C basically says we're running a regression with C as the independent variable and M as a dependent variable. And the case of E, we are looking at M causing that. So if we establish both of these, if both of these models are significant, then we would be able to assert that M is a mediating variable, meaning that C doesn't directly impact E. However, C impacts M, which then impacts E. That is the argument here. So again, something that is very common in the literature, where we are talking about a mediating effect. And then finally, and this is the last model I'm going to share, because I'm eager to also answer the questions which might be bursting on the chat. And the idea here is what we call a third variable idea. And this is how the mediating impact first came about, which is that when you think of a causal relationship between C and E, what if there's a third variable that impacts both C and E? This was how it was first conceptualized. Now, a very common way in which that is tested out is a model that looks like this. Here you have a mediated relationship where C goes up to M and then to E, but C also directly impacts E. So you basically have two regressions here. The regression at the bottom, which is M equals beta 3 plus beta 4C. You just first verify that C is in fact causing M, and then E equals beta 0 plus beta 1 M plus beta 2C. in which case you're verifying that both M and C are causing E, right? So it's a little bit of a change, but I would say that if you just very thoroughly understand these models, single cause, multiple causes, moderating effect, mediating effect 1 and 2. I've shared 5 different ways of thinking about causality. I think if you understand these very well, I think you will be really well positioned for success as you are conducting your analysis and figuring out how to write your paper. Um, and then finally, I wanted to end on something positive, which is, of course, we want all of you to be publishing extensively. So recently ran into somebody that is the highest published author in marketing, and he was being asked what is it that made his papers so saleable, and how come he was such a prolific author. And he said that, it all has to do with the title and the abstract. He said your abstract and title must be really engaging. The contribution should be clearly described. You should say that, look, we're doing something very big and addressing a pressing issue and making a big contribution. That is very important. Literature review, again, very important. I'm happy to hear we went through a good session. One of the things you should know is that the people that review your paper come from the authors of the papers that you cite in the lit review. So make sure you choose them carefully. And just read the papers in the fields that you're trying to publish. It is now very common to use tables to summarize key learnings and gaps as a way of summarizing a whole lot of papers. So those kinds of ways of presentation of information have become very common. Theory and hypotheses, again, lay a solid foundation for the empirical results, persuasively argue for causality, clear research method, strong results. It's okay to get some non-significant results. Very, very important. A lot of times people believe that only a paper that has every single variable as significant will get published. And that is not true. It's simply not true. I've seen papers published and they might have 7 hypotheses, 2 did not work out. That's okay. They will leave it in. Especially the first time you're submitting it to a journal, please leave in non-significant results as well. Your reviewers may come in and say, look, run a regression by leaving those variables out, at which point you can do that. But you don't really have to worry about getting all positive results. And if you get some non-significant results, it's not the end of the world. Okay, so I will just stop sharing now, and I will see how we can answer the questions in the chat and see. Shika, can you help me prioritize questions, or
Sure, sure.
are there things
Yes,
that?
sir. I will. I will surely, sir. First of all, let me thank you for such a wonderful session covering all the intricate aspects of truth claims and causality in the research paper in such a simple and effective manner. So I shall take up the questions
Yeah,
first.
please.
So there's a question from Mr. Mark. How to distinguish between causality and association?
Right. So remember we talked about 3 factors. So we said concomitant variation. We said cause has to come before effect, and alternative explanations should be identified and properly dealt with. So causation just means as one increases, other increases. But we don't know why it's happening, and we don't know if there is a third variable that might be explaining what is going on, or if there are some other control variables that can come and help solve solve the solve the logic. So basically we in fact explicitly say correlation is not causation for that reason.
Okay. Then, so there's next question from Dr. Prashant Singh. He says, is hypothesis always mandatory in research papers, or a researcher can choose research questions as an option instead of hypothesis?
Yeah, so a research question is seen as exploratory and it is seen as appropriate in areas where the theory is incipient or inchoate, still emergent. Those are situations where we might use research questions. In those situations, I think the journals might be fine. But in some cases, there are some research traditions where some subfields might be more open to research questions than others.
Okay.
I just think that the authors retain too much discretion when they say research questions, because it's like saying, I want to go see what's under the hood, and then the results are all like, hey, look what I found. So it is hard to accept that what you found is somehow novel, because it looks like that is all that you were looking for. But yeah. So in general, research questions could matter for exploratory, sorts of analysis, and some fields might be more accepting of those. But generally speaking, hypotheses put you on firmer ground.
Okay. So there's next question from Dr. Vivek Pachori, and he says that what points should be taken care of while writing case-based research papers, and how are they different from other research papers?
Yeah. So the case-based. I myself have a couple of published cases, and my process that I went through in the review process. This is what I learned. What I learned was the reviewers nowadays, because of the internet, they can Google and quickly find information about the case, and hence they can ask questions about, did this really happen, or is this how it really happened? So um, in cases, what I think people are looking for is, first of all, is it well written? Secondly, is it clearly describing the information that was used that could drive decision making? um, and again, logical structure, is it logically structured? But fourth, is this really what happened in that industry to this manager? They're very interested in that. This is something we sometimes called ecological validity, meaning that we're interested in saying, is this really what happened? If that's what's happened, we want to learn more. So when I got my review back for my case, the question that I got was, my understanding is this is not what happened. In this section, you're claiming these things actually took place that did not take place. So I had to go back. I had to find ways of researching the organization again, and then come back and with other evidence that helped the reviewers understand, okay, now I've done my research. So once they're satisfied that you have actually truly described a situation that is interesting and novel, that is well written, logically structured, I think they're more interested in accepting that.
Okay. All right. So there's next question is from Mr. Bhaskar Kapoor, and he says that can we use the contents of our previous published paper in the new paper, and can it be cited in the new paper in the reference section as well?
Yeah, this is somewhat tricky. So let me clarify a few things. Firstly, please do not assume that text that appeared in a previous paper can simply be replicated in a future paper. You will have to actually cite yourself very formally, because there is actually a concept called auto plagiarism. So even though it is your own work, if you're simply reproducing content from previous pages, you'll get caught up in some academic integrity issues. I think that is item
Okay.
number one. Item number two, um, please remember that peer review journal, the review process is double blind. The reviewers don't know who you are, you don't know who they are.
Mhm.
Sometimes it may be in your interest. So let's say you published a paper in the Journal of Finance, or some like very reputed journal. Uh, you may want to start off by saying that there is this paper in the Journal of Finance that talks about this, this concept, and here we are providing an extension of that. that would be absolutely fine. But it is very a strong way of saying that that was my work, and now I'm
Okay.
extending that work. But I
Uh-huh.
think certainly using text and using it verbatim in another paper, absolute
Mhm.
no-no.
Okay. Right, sir. And the next question is from Mr. Satyendra Singh, and he's asking, how do you go about identifying the best journal to publish any paper?
Oh boy, this is yeah. So this is not easy. I think it's a I would say it's a matter of taste.
Mhm.
Uh, so I think honestly the first thing is director ma'am is here too, so I will choose my words carefully. That many of us are in institutions where publication is required to get tenure, publication
Yeah.
is required to get promoted, publication is required to get bonuses and so on. So, so I think the local criteria of your institution matter quite a bit. I know that in India, when I talk to other deans, what they're increasingly telling me is that publication in a Scopus ranked journal is very important. So the first
Mhm.
thing that I would do is check to see if that's the case. There are many other lists for business schools. There is an Australian business school journals list. There is a associated business schools list from UK that I like. Um, so you may want to kind of do a total objective assessment of your work and compare it with the papers of that journal and ask yourself if you are contributing at a level that is proportional to what you're seeing in papers already published there.
Mhm.
um, and every single author I know goes through an analysis of ease of publication and a speed of publication with the prestige of the publication. So you will
Right.
have to figure that out.
Mhm.
One of the things worth knowing is that there are some journals that produce more papers per year.
Mhm.
A great example is Journal of Business Ethics. uh,
Yeah.
they are they, they are highly ranked, and they also produce more papers than most other journals. So that may be again something to look at, but ultimately you have to do what you think is right.
That's right, sir. The next question is from Shubham, and he's saying, what's the best manner to write the conclusion of a research paper?
Yeah, so at one point, and I think some journals still do this. After you're done with your results, so you have intro, so a title, abstract, intro, lit review, theory and hypotheses, results, and after the results, we would have two sections before conclusion. We would have limitations,
Mm.
and we would have managerial implications, and then conclusion. But now what is happening is in some journals that limitations and managerial implications are going away. So conclusion needs to step in for those as well. I think if I'm an editor of or reviewer of a paper, I'm really asking questions along the lines of, is this paper, is this author clear about the potential limitations of this, of this paper or not? I think so. That's something. But also the conclusion has to come out and firmly say, use a sentence like this: we contribute to the literature on, and you insert whatever literature you think you're contributing to. For example, we contribute to the literature on leadership in innovation by, and have a list: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Identify 4 or 5 contributions that you're making. Try to present your work as multidimensional. Don't
Mhm.
just say that I'm doing, I think sometimes, if you pardon my Hindi, sometimes they'll say, "Hum kaun hote hain bhai?" The conclusion is not a place for "Hum kaun hote hain bhai." You know, आपने कुछ किया है तो ठीक से बताइए, स्पष्ट तरीके से बताइए कि क्या किया आपने. We contribute to the literature, you know, in these ways. So, for example, we have a theoretical contribution, we have a, methodological contribution, we have, a unique context from which we draw our data, and then we solve a major issue that has been identified in previous, publications. These are the sorts of things that that come up. Um,
Um, right, sir. Sir, but what I have seen is the directions for future research is also a part of the when we are writing the conclusion of the research paper after the contributions and the managerial implications. I've seen paper ending with the directions for future
yeah,
research.
yeah,
I think.
and honestly, there, I have struggled because it feels like, and every time I have been productive in an area, I have published not one paper, but two, three, four papers. So I really struggle with, am I giving other people in the field too many ideas? You know, so you have to be a little strategic there. How do you
Oh,
want
okay.
to, present that? So if the editor comes back and tells you, hey, I don't see any directions for future research here, um, yeah, then you're forced to, you have to do it. But the first time I submit the article, I probably am not going to be too enthusiastic about, presenting all different things, because we might be out there collecting data on that and
Mhm.
nobody else is. So want to be thoughtful about that.
Right, right, sir. So there is next question from Ms. Rupa Devi, and she's asking, what is the distinction between causality and co-integration in time series analysis?
Up beyond the scope of this talk. Thank you.
Okay.
Because she is talking about something called Granger causality. So I would ask
Uh,
her to start off by looking at what is called Granger causality and beyond the scope of this talk. This is about research theory and research method. We are not going to get into that.
okay, all right, sir. So there's another question from Ms. Shivani Agarwal, and she's asking, in which condition we can apply logistic regression?
Yeah, that is so. Logistic regression is a fascinating, kind of tool that we all have in our arsenal, and the logistic regression is used when you have the dependent variable as dichotomous or categorical. So typically, the dependent variable in a multiple regression is a continuous variable. For example, income or weight or even a Likert scale. Um, so, but a in a logistic regression, the dependent variable is either dichotomous, like male female, or yes no, or things that have only two answers. There's a version called multiple logistical regression where you can have multiple categories, where basically you have, let's say, yellow, blue, green, red, and then you're trying to figure out which is which using the regression. But rather than a continuous variable, it is a categorical variable. That's the main difference.
Okay. Uh, so there's another question from Miss Seema, and she's saying, do international journal accepts paper without hypothesis?
Um, again, I'm trying to convince her to my point of view. So I'm trying to argue that, again, remember, I was describing so many different types of other papers. You could write a theoretical essay. You could do literature review and future directions, entire paper. You can do a meta-analysis. You can do a qualitative research paper. All of those can go through without really hypotheses. But I think, in my view, causality is the way by which you can have the greatest impact in providing your work. So I think certainly if you try to publish one of these other types of papers, sure, go ahead. I mean, you might be able to successfully do that. Good luck to you, and wish you the very best.
Right, so so there's another question from Miss Anupreet Kaur, and she's saying that if there is no theory that is combining all the constructs to be studied in the model, but the researchers have been done in the past depicting hypotheses and relationships, can we use this model for structured equation modeling using AMIS?
Wow. I'm, I'm reading this carefully again. I see it in the chat too. What
Yeah.
if there's no theory that is combining all the concepts to be studied? Yeah, so let me present a new concept. It is called adjacency. So sometimes we believe that what we are studying is so novel, there is nothing like that that exists. But the so if that's true, then there should be no lit review at all, right? And there should be no theory at all, right? But a lot of times, what we are doing in the theory case is really going to saying, well, literally speaking, there is nothing explaining this and this, but something that is right next to it is very um, similar to this. Why don't we bring concepts from that and then apply it, to what we are looking at? That is one way of doing it. um, I think I understand what Anuprit is saying, because sometimes you might have a subset of the model that has been shown before, but the whole model has not been tested ever. So I don't think there's any problem with doing that. Uh, but overall, your entire structural equation model, you use Amos, no problem, has to be justified, theoretically as well. We need to know that this
Yes.
is not just a data-driven exercise, uh, that you have the data for, but in fact, that you're justifying this by theory. Now, your reviewers will tell you whether the subset of the model that we already have seen before uh, is was already the main model and you're only adding something very small, or if what you're adding is something really powerful. They will be able to judge that. But you can try, to do that. It is very common for people to continue to publish um,
Mhm.
related, papers. So there's no problem with that.
Okay. So next question is from Dr. Gopal, and he's saying, what is the ideal length of best research paper?
Yeah. So every journal is different. So for example, my discipline, my PhD is in marketing and econ. So let me take marketing as a case study. In marketing, we have a journal called Marketing Letters. Marketing Letters prefers shorter articles. I've seen articles there about 10 to 15 pages long, but they tend to be very mathematical. They tend to be very quantitative.
Mhm.
Um, I believe in, and then we have on the other extreme, we have a journal called Marketing Science. I've at one point I've seen they were even accepting papers that has 50 pages, submitted to them. So I think it's very important to understand that each journal has its own mission and own audience that it's trying to cultivate. And for
Mhm.
that a journal, please research what it is that previous papers in that field in that journal, how they look like. Based on that, you can structure and you can easily figure out, what is the ideal length. But I think the most common length of papers that I see is somewhere between 35 and 40 pages.
Okay.
But don't
Okay.
ask me, is it 12-point font, double spaced? I'm not going to answer all that.
Right. So the next question is from Mr. Osama, and he says, is it okay to publish a paper in a conference and then extend it as a journal paper with some parts replicated?
Yeah, I think that is a fairly, common, practice that is very commonly done. I think it's a little so. See, conferences have become smart about this. So what conferences will now do is they will ask you for what they call an extended abstract. They will not ask you for the full paper. So the
Mhm.
title may be the same, but you would have published an extended abstract in the information systems conference, and then you go and publish an information systems research, the full paper. So
Mhm.
I think that is one way of sidestepping it. So just work with the conferences. I think the conference proceedings are smart about this. And if the conference allows you to do an extended abstract, I would really do that to sidestep this issue. But I know people that have done this. But I also know people who are troubled by this, who think that it's like double dipping. You
Okay.
got it in first, and then it's like you're getting two papers for the same work. So I would look into that. I would try to understand that more.
Right, sir. So I think we have time and we can go for two, three questions more if you permit.
Yeah. I'm
Yes,
fine.
sir.
2, 3 questions is
Sure,
fine.
sure, sir. Sir, there's a question from Ms. Komal Bhagat, and she is saying that if we include definitions in research paper, then the plagiarism increases. So, how do we reduce the plagiarism? At times, it's important to include definitions. So, how do we go about it?
Yeah. So, as I get older, like one of the things that we do, and I do when I receive questions, is I question the premise, meaning that I do not accept the statements in the question to necessarily be true.
Okay.
So this person is making a claim that the inclusion of definitions increases the risk of plagiarism.
Hmm.
Not buying it. No, not
Okay.
necessarily true. So let me explain. You could easily include a definition in quotes. This is standard writing practice. And you could say that, so and so has defined this construct to be this, and you can include the entire definition if that's what you care about, but include it in quotes and cite the author and cite the page number of the paper on which this was found. But I do not believe that including definitions in any way, shape, or form increases the risk of plagiarism. I think all of you may be aware, but there are plagiarism checkers. There is a software called Turnitin.com, for
Yes.
example. So
Yes.
if you're highly unsure, just run your paper through that before you submit, to a journal.
Right, sir. So next question is from Dr. From Mr. Ajay Pratap, and he says, "Does impact factor of a journal is a measure of being it the best journal?"
So there is some complexity here. So I think generally speaking, impact factor is diagnostic, meaning that a high impact factor journal is a good place to publish. A high impact factor journal is a place that is quite influential in the field. So generally speaking, that is true. However, please know that the mathematics for impact factor is subject to self-citation bias, meaning that if when you write in that journal, you cite papers from that journal. So suppose I'm writing a paper in the Journal of Interactive Marketing, and in my references, there are 3 references to other papers in the Journal of Interactive Marketing. That
Mhm.
also counts to impact factor. And so there are some editors who have gone out of their way to boost impact factors using this technique. So
Mhm.
sometimes it does not really matter. So the broader question is, should I pay attention to impact factor? Generally speaking, yes, it is one data point. But in general,
Right.
also make sure that the journal is not on the predatory list of journal. There is you can easily Google and says predatory list of journals. So make sure it's not a predatory journal that will simply publish anything. You can also check there are any number of journalists. Cabell's is one of them, Cabells. And I mentioned the Australian Business Journal list, the ABS Journal list. Of course, you have the UT Dallas Journal list, Financial Times Top 30, and so on. And certainly, I think those are very reliable indicators of quality.
Shikha ma'am, you are muted. Shikha ma'am,
You are
unmute
muted now,
yourself.
Shika.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
So there's another question, and she says that there are theoretical, most of the things are theoretical when we look into the domain of humanities and social sciences, and not empirical. So many of the ideas and hypotheses are ideas of the writer. So how do you validate your own ideas?
Oh, okay. Uh, yeah. So first question back to this is: does truth exist?
Yes.
Okay. So one could claim that there is no such thing as a truth, and there are certainly some philosophers who are sympathetic to this idea that
Mhm.
that a truth does not exist. But according to me, and I've said this, before, that a cynic is a person that stops believing in love and truth, and that's my definition of a cynic. Um, so certainly there is room for creativity in the research process. I think the creativity does come in the way you coin your title or abstract or do the introduction and capture the attention of the reader. There is a place for creativity. There is a place for your creative contributions. For example, many of the theoretical contributions in field X have come from some other field where they have been well established, and then somebody brought it from that field to this field. So you
Mhm.
apply theory from some other place over here. That's also fine. But I think theory cannot be imagination alone, though. I think it
Yeah.
has to be grounded in the larger reality of what has been done before. Um,
Right.
I hope that's helpful.
That's right, sir. I think that's very clear. And I think I've taken up most of the questions.
Okay.
And there are some repetitions. So I would take up one last question, which is from Mr. Satyamurthy. And he says, why good journals take more time to publish papers, even though the content of the paper are pretty good?
So and I also saw there's another question on journal submission fees. Yeah, so
Yeah.
on journal submission fees, I think in some fields, I believe accounting is one, finance is one. I know definitely this is true in accounting and finance. I think some operations journals are that way too. They just believe that external reviewers are more motivated to review if they are paid. Okay.
Hmm.
Hence, they charge a review fee. They claim that it's 100% pass through. We're not keeping it. We're collecting the fees and we're passing it on to the reviewers. Now they're more motivated. You get a better review. Aren't you happy? This is the argument. Um, the
Yeah.
the length of time is proportional to the motivation and ability and time pressure of the editor-in-chief, area editor, and the external reviewers. There are some
Hmm.
times where people are very senior in their field, but they're just so busy, they're assigned a paper, they just don't bother to look at it for months. And in some cases, I'm sad to say that there have been some unethical behaviors by um, too much delay. So, for example, if you have submitted a paper that looks similar to something that I'm about to submit, I hold back your paper, submit mine, and when my paper gets published, only then I release your paper. I've seen this happen at least once, and it's not right. But for most of the time, people are going to give you a fair shake. They're just going to give you a chance. And I think the interest is certainly in coming up with great work, and certainly it's up to the editor to exercise that control. But I would absolutely encourage you to be very aggressive in pushing the editor if you have not heard back. Write the editor daily if you want and say, hey, how come I haven't heard back? How come I haven't heard back? So after 3 months, you can start checking in, and every day you can write the editor. And the person is going to get sick and tired of you. Sometimes an assistant professor will come to me and say, oh my God, I'm so scared of doing that. What if the editor gets upset with me? Uh, well, there's no other way to move people. Sometimes it's a completely people-driven enterprise where the motivations of individuals matters immensely. So anyway, thank you all so much. It was absolute pleasure. I We have such high hopes for all the colleagues from India. And Shika, I have one last request of all the attendees.
Sure, sir.
I saw that there are some people from Bahrain, some people from India, and so on. We
Right.
are very interested in learning about your context. So don't feel like you should always do international work. If you want to do international work, you can do a comparative study. For example, India
Right.
versus UAE versus Bahrain versus Africa versus Japan. fascinating study. You can do that, no problem. But don't feel like your context is unimportant and you somehow have to get financial performance data of Fortune 500 firms, and that's the only way to publish in international journals. Let us, get the Indian stories out there too, in terms of how, our context works and what goes on, in the minds of consumers, managers, leaders in India. I think that is very much an encouragement, and I think we are going to see a real explosion of academic work coming from India. And so wish you all the very best.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir, for such a splendid session. Of course, when I looked at the topic, I myself thought it's a very abstract kind of a topic. But then the way you uncovered the